Dear John, please could you play some punk rock on your show for me? Well, indeed I can. Anyway, we'll hear a lot of music that may be punk rock and a lot that certainly is.
Well, life in Scotland in the 70s.
Extremes, I suppose. I think the 70s was quite an extreme decade.
A kind of sea of brown and denim.
It still felt a bit like post-war, you know. It had that feeling of abandonment.
We'd come through periods of time where the rubbish was, didn't get collected on the streets, where power cuts were things that, weren't expected.
The sense of being apart, alienation, no future.
Austere, I think, is the word.
Just coming from Scotland in the 1970s, you didn't really think you could be in a group that would be successful. There was, and you had Pilot, I suppose.
I always wanted to be in the band. When I was 3, I was in a band with my granddad. We were called the Beatles. He was Ringo Starr and I was John Lennon, right?
The Faces were my favourite band, but I have to admit that I did used to listen to my brother's Genesis albums.
We were like explorers. The brand was an explorer. I actually read quite a lot of military strategy.
We all grew up with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, but that was our big brothers and sisters' music.
Well, I was a Bowie fan. Yeah, I made a guitar.
You know these old egg slicers? It would have 10 thin strings and you'd lay the egg in and then press it down and it would slice the egg. I used to chase my dad around playing that, saying, buy me a guitar, buy me a guitar, buy me a guitar.
And then down at the music shop, get the pianist picture chords, and that's it, you're all set.
Everybody was calling themselves Brian Puke or something like this, so I called myself Bobby Charm.
The people who were there know what went on in 1977. We'll always have punk.
It's a predictable thing to say, but there's certain periods in which things like the late 60s or the early era of hip-hop, there seems to be a whole group, for cultural reasons, whatever reason, that are trying to express themselves differently or struggling to do something interesting, and it seemed like something like that was certainly happening in Edinburgh. You could feel it.
I remember the Sex Pistols appearing on the NME or Melody Maker, and it was just like, wow.
And clearly the best-known band, I should think, in the country at the moment must be the Sex Pistols.
Every night, 10 o'clock, John Peel. Just when you heard, like, Anarchy in the UK on your wee radio under the covers, it was just like...
Virgin Records had an appearance of the Sex Pistols, and we all went along, and that's how we all met each other.
Sid was nowhere to be seen, but Paul Cook and Steve Jones and John Lydon were there.
I got John Lydon to sign a single I just bought. As I handed it to him to sign it, he went, I despise you. And we were all like, oh, Johnny Rotten despises us. It was one of those moments where you realise all the things you were feeling about being slightly disenfranchised and being young and not having money. To suddenly be with a group of people, you looked around and you thought, oh, they're just like me, you know.
Punk was a great thing for self-expression and all that, but walking down the street, you did get some stick. You know, if you were dressed in that kind of unusual way. I'm not talking about particularly strangely dressed either. I mean, we didn't have dyed hair or anything, just straight-leg jeans was enough to get you some, smart remarks.
We weren't like London punks, we didn't have any money. There wasn't the bondage trousers and all that look. The look was very much making yourself look as cool as possible because we'd all been into Bowie and stuff, so we immediately called ourselves glam punks. And then the White Riot tour came.
It was a real year zero moment. I mean, it was incredible.
In May '77, the White Riot tour hit the east coast of Scotland. A star-studded bill of new punk heroes. The Clash, the Slits, and young soul rebels, Subway Sect.
Yeah, the White Riot tour, on the big gigs, they had like multiple support acts, and we were like relegated right down to not at the bottom of the bill, because we had the prefects underneath us sometimes, or the slits.
Bands before that they were like divinities almost. They weren't connected at all in any way to the people who were out front. And that completely changed the very first time that the Slits walked on stage. The singer, she walked on the stage, right, and said, "Has anybody got a comb?" She asked the audience if anybody had a comb and came down in the audience. So she had broken that barrier, and it was unbelievable. It was like, I want this. I want more.
A lot of people, they sort of got off on like the Slits and the Subway Sect more than they seemed to the Clash, and took more ideas of that maybe they could do it themselves from us, rather than the Clash didn't actually make it like anyone could have done it themselves, because they had a bloody backdrop of about 120 foot long. You know, the band couldn't just go out and get an articulated lorry and carry a backdrop around with them, whereas they could just go down Oxfam, get a load of grey jumpers like us and go on stage.
We were just ripe for it, for punk coming along, really.
It was just like a total DIY, don't give a fuck kind of thing that they were coming from. But it was intelligent.
There was no polish to it. And that kind of kick-started everybody to think, well, there's not an enormous amount of musicianship going on here, but there's a lot of energy. We can do that. And out of this grew a whole new generation of musicians.
There are certain records, tracks, songs that you hear and they stop you dead. Spiral Scratch was one. I bought my then boyfriend a copy of Spiral Scratch. He said, "Gotta listen to this."
Hilary's boyfriend was Bob Last, an ex-student of architecture. He had a plan to build an empire with his company Fast Product. He had the vision, he had the name, but he didn't have the product.
I guess I was an aspiring entrepreneur or impresario. I wasn't brought up on pop music. I listened to Spiral Scratch and I thought, okay, this is what Fast Product should do. And went out to find what I would, what my Spiral Scratch.
Bob and Hilary were roading with the Rosillos, an Edinburgh garage punk band who'd been on the go since '76.
When the punk thing started up, they didn't start and then we joined on it. We all started up about the same time. And it was also like, there's something about our attitude which is it's the same. We just got up and did it, really.
So we weren't taken seriously by, any of the other bands that were on the go at the time. They just thought we were taking the piss, right? Which in a way we were, I suppose.
I mean, the Rosillos, they were part of that scene. It was a very small scene, so you go around the country and you play a gig, and you're going to meet everyone who's in a band.
Bob was just one of them people that used his own initiative quite a bit, and he was the obvious choice to manage the group, He
was very creative and a lot of ideas, maybe a tad pretentious.
I was interested in Mao's military strategy. I mean, God knows why.
We went along on a number of gigs, and through that we started to see these other bands all over Britain. And we thought, right, why don't we do a record label?
And so Fast Product was born. Over 2 short years, only a dozen records would be released on the label. But from the word go, it challenged the might of the majors and paved the way for Factory and more.
I don't honestly think any of us at the time had any idea what an important, cultural thing Fast would actually be.
Before Factory, and, pretty much at the same time, if not slightly before Rough Trade, oh yeah, Fast Product. We're right there at the start of it.
Fast would channel the homespun energy of punk and create a label where the image was as important as the music.
Started running the label out of a flat in Keir Street, and as is always the case in big cultural movements, the local bar has an important, role to play.
The pub shut at 10. That was it. The pub shut at 10 and that was it. So it's all back to mine.
That winter of 1977 and 78, when Bob and Hilary were collecting people and collecting sounds, was amazing.
They were collaborators.
Hilary was kind of the heart of it, I think. She gave it heart. And I think that was probably the first time that I'd come across a woman like that who was so strong.
It was Bob and Hilary, wasn't Bob's girlfriend.
Equivalent to sort of Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood.
He had a big flat, big high ceilings and huge windows, and it was full of art, you know, a lot of which he'd created himself.
It was on the top floor, so we used to go up there and make toasties and have cups of tea and things like that.
I remember a Dalek in the corner of the room, and I found out it was like a Rosillo's prop.
In yellow on the walls, Bob had written in big letters, "This is luxury." And that just seemed so radical.
We would talk about films, books. We'd even do it sounds really pretentious now, but I mean, we'd even do a little bit of cutting up of stuff and doing a bit of art.
It was a place where ideas hatched.
Many bands were hatched there too. Keir Street was the hub of the thriving art scene in Edinburgh at the time, and Flat 2 was its beating heart. The Future Fire Engines hung out there, the Ets, the Twin Sets, the Thursdays, the Flowers. The list was, quite literally, long. And popping in for the occasional toastie was the band who would rewrite the punk manifesto, the Scars, formed by brothers Paul and John Mackey.
We wanted to write pop songs, you know, but we wanted them to have energy and we wanted them to be different.
Put an advert in a record shop window. It was called Hot Licks, and we knew that we wanted a real frontman who was going to perform.
One day I was in Hot Licks and I saw an advert by a band called The Scars. They were looking for a singer. So I decided to phone them up. I did a rehearsal with them, what you would call an audition of sorts.
But it was quite a fantastic audition. I got to hand it to Robert.
It was almost like one of those horror films where the scary character elevates himself into the air in a sort of exorcist type fashion.
And started shrieking. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. So I sort of looked across at John and I thought, but, you know, we've really got a live one here.
The other guy was so frightened by his performance that he just got up and left. So that was it, he had the gig.
This wasn't the only band of brothers in town. Russell and Tam Dean Byrne had formed anarchic combo the Dirty Reds.
There was a sort of budding of politics in me, and that's why I wanted to call our band the Dirty Reds. And one of the first songs we wrote was called The Rich Reds. Here come the Rich Reds from underneath our waterbeds.
Walk on stage.
Russell, you've seen him with his drums. He was a local butcher up in Clemerston, but he also was a jazz drummer, and he had a kit. What he was doing to earn money was he was going rabbiting up Clemerston Hill and selling the rabbits to the butcher. So he convinced me it was that I'd front the money for the drum kit, and he'd go ferreting to make the money back. Of course, Russell was at that age where he started smoking and drinking that. He never went ferreting, and he still owes me the money.
The Dirty Reds split into Dirty Reds 2, featuring a young Davey Henderson on guitar and the Flowers with Hilary on vocals.
I had written a lot of lyrics that were all sort of angry young woman lyrics, but it made me sick with nerves half the time.
There was lots of eventful gigs involving lacerations and almost decapitations, etc.
Our first gig was for the Edinburgh University Communist Society, and in some hall up in the university. And I do remember that it was like Russell threw the cymbal, and it was like, you know, it's just sort of flying through the air. If I had hit somebody, it would have been death.
But the music, in a way, strangely, was less important than the excitement of the feeling that you were doing something new.
One thing differentiated Edinburgh amongst other sort of punk movements in the country was The fact that people wanted to move on from punk really quickly and make their own original music, and punk was a starting point, but it wasn't supposed to be, you know, perfecting a formula.
Always in the vanguard were the Scars, pushing boundaries with their confrontational and provocative image.
They were 17. Really, at that time, they were just, nobody could touch them. Super intelligent boys, and they could really play. That was the thing, they could all play.
Our original sound was based on what kind of instruments we had.
Yeah, I made a guitar, but you know, I couldn't afford to buy one.
And it was really overdriven at the top end. It was just a sound that I really liked. It sounded like nobody else was making.
Sometimes, you know, equipment got damaged and tempers were lost, but it was all real.
Glam rock was a big influence on the Scars and allowed us to start wearing makeup.
Like everybody else was dressing up in an aggressive way, so we would dress up in a kind of feminine type way.
Bobby King would have ladies' shoes on, high heel shoes, a big permed hair and big earrings, and he'd be booed. But because he was so cool and so strong, the boos would turn into cheers. Because he was like, I'm having you, you fuck. I'm having you, the audience. He had such conviction.
We'd come on stage and people would shout poofters or whatever like that. So I would usually start the gig by saying, well, anybody that wants to fight us, you're welcome to meet us backstage after the gig. Nobody ever came backstage.
With unbridled confidence and charisma, the Scars knew they were the best band in town.
That is a letter that Paul from the Scars wrote to Sue, and delivered to her backstage about how much I hate you. I hate your band. I've seen them only once and I would never go to see you again. You were shit. Boring derivative music has always made me sick and you're the worst. Yours sincerely, Paul from the Scars. I found that the other day.
On tour with the Rosillos, Bob and Hilary were on the hunt for their Spiral Scratch.
We were like explorers. The brand was an explorer. But I liked the idea of the mass market.
Our thing was always have as much control as you can, because then you're much more likely to be able, not necessarily always to do what you want, but to do more of what you want than a major record label who's just controlling you would ever let you do.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Challenging the mainstream was the aim, and they recognised a similar spirit of subversion in punk provocateurs, the Mekons, who would be the first band to sign to Fast.
They were an exemplar of having a world of ideas and absolutely no interest in musical competence for its own sake, which was kind of part of what appealed. If it somehow worked or had an attitude that I thought was interesting, I absolutely didn't care about musically what rules it transgressed. I went to bank manager and I told him I wanted to borrow 400 quid to put a record out. And he said, okay. And so we got him up here and recorded him in a cottage in the Borders.
Someone said, oh, I think my uncle's got a place in the country we can go to. Get down there and discover it was all locked up. His uncle only stayed there sometimes. So the long and short of it was that Mekon's first record started by breaking into a house in the middle of nowhere. And I was quite small, so I was put through a window, let everyone in, took over this house for the weekend, recorded the Mekon single.
It was one thing to make a record, but quite another to get it out to the masses.
I didn't have a clue how to do it. I just assumed I'd made something fucking great. I'm going to find a way of... There are going to be people that want to buy it. I mean, it was that simple.
I got sent on the overnight bus to go down to London to talk Rough Trade into taking on the records.
Famously, Rough Trade said it was the worst played record they'd ever heard and they weren't stocking it. And to this day, I torture Jeff Travis with the fact that he would not release our first record on the grounds of it not being musically competent.
Indie distributors Rough Trade may have knocked him back, but undeterred, Bob found an outlet through a Scottish chain which championed new cutting-edge music.
Well, Bruce's was an absolute focus for the punk movement. Bruce is a big music fan, and we had all the punks of Edinburgh coming into the shop, it's pretty much every day of the week. Bob Last and Hilary Morrison, they were bringing a box of 25 to start things off with.
I don't think we started really selling things until it got reviewed in the NME. Made it single of the week. That's the equivalent these days of it suddenly trending on Twitter or whatever.
Bob and Hilary quickly built on that success by signing Sheffield Electronic Pioneers 2.3, an agitprop post-punk outfit Gang of Four, and their debut single took fast to #1 in the indie charts.
It's one of the coolest independent labels in Britain. In fact, if not the coolest, because at that time Factory Records didn't exist.
One of my mates came into our office with the first Gang of Four thing, and the packaging and everything on those fast releases. I mean, it influenced Factory. Amazing. I mean, what Bob Last did, he was a template for early, cool indie things,
Many people involved in punk thought that this was all some sort of grubby marketing thing. We took the opposite point of view. We said, actually, one of the reasons we're excited about doing this is because I like deploying packaging and marketing. Brand was what would give us power to introduce music to people that they wouldn't otherwise hear.
The idea that, you had to have all the fast records in sequence because it was like an oeuvre. It was a bit like collecting trading cards, bubblegum cards or something. You wanted to be part of this scene.
Bob is a conceptualist. He was doing all these things with posters and artwork about consumerism, the kind of stuff that's absolutely accepted nowadays, but then seemed quite unusual.
We famously released and successfully sold bits of rotting orange peel. The point about that was to make a point that if you put it in a different context, even rotting orange peel may have a value.
For Bob, concept was king. The distinctive look and radical approach of Fast marked them out from the crowd and began to attract interest worldwide.
I can remember him playing a tape that he just got from the American. It was Human Fly, it was Cramps. And Rab hated it. He was like, it's just rock and roll. I don't see it. And for whatever reason, Bob decided not to take them on.
Okay, ready. Let's do it.
That was a really interesting thing. I went up to Bob's one afternoon and he'd received a cassette from a band and a letter on silver foil, and it was the flipping Human League.
Listen to the voice of Buddha. Sing, stop your sericulture.
We, as the Human League, never had any idea that anybody would ever be interested in putting out any of our stuff. Paul Bauer, so he was in 2.3, he was the lead singer and writer. I met as a fellow trainee manager at the Co-op in Sheffield, boning bacon and stacking shelves. He was the one who heard Being Boiled. He said, you've got to send this to Bob. I reckon he'll really like it. I think it's brilliant. I'm going, what are you talking about? First of all, it's in mono. Nobody's going to want to buy a mono record,
There's no excuse for thoughtless slaying.
I'd put the record out before I ever met them. I don't know if we even spoke on the phone. I just wrote back and said, yeah, great, I want to put it out now. Very strange combination of apparently incredibly significant and important lyrics that also insisted on being completely meaningless and poppy at the same time. And I loved that tension, so they had me straight away.
Next thing you know, it's out and John Peel's playing it on a regular basis on his show. And this is utterly crazy. It sold I think, around about 5,000 in 10 weeks.
It was phenomenal, and that was the kind of thing that was happening almost on a weekly basis, It was heaven, because musically you didn't know what was happening next.
If there was a market for cutting-edge electronic music, Bob was happy to exploit it. And there was. Anything that challenged the status quo was desirable, and the status quo was now punk.
Punk itself settled into an incredibly antiquated and geriatric set of rules about what was and wasn't punk, which, we were already completely uninterested in.
Punk turned into post-punk very quickly, really.
You know, the board has been wiped clean, so it was a question of kind of starting again.
Everything had changed. There was a complete sort of cultural shift.
By now, the Dirty Reds had evolved into another band, with Davey on vocals and his old school friend Murray on guitar.
The name is a good one, actually. The first piece of literary work I ever got published, possibly the only, was when I was 6 years old at school. It was a poem about fire engines. You know, they're red, they're noisy.
What I loved about that when I was a young guy was just the fucking rawness, man. Do you know what I mean? Just fucking amazing.
Yeah, it seemed like they just wanted to drive forward at full tilt. All other considerations secondary.
Our main objective was to have something that was not laid back in any way. Laid back was just bad.
The fire engines were just what you might call an enigma. And I remember very early on seeing them come into the Tap of Lauriston. They all walked in and they'd got this job lot of long kind of overcoats. And they looked like a band.
Fire engines were famous for really short, aggressive, explosive attacks of sets, you know, maybe 10 to 15 minutes long, and it was kind of astounding to see.
People would say, you only played for 15 minutes, and it's like, well, who wants to? You're only famous for 15 minutes.
I think Fire Engines were one of the best Scottish bands ever. Totally underrated. Amazing live band. Should have been a really big one.
We had a song called Discord, and Mark was saying, you should put that out, it's really poppy. It's like Blondie. And he said, oh, definitely not Get Up and Use Me.
Use me.
Use me. They clubbed together with a couple of friends, Angus Groovy and Paul Steen, and made Get Up and Use Me for around 100 quid.
I don't know how, I think there was maybe 1,000 copies. So there was a big box of vinyl and a big box of sleeves. Angus would start gluing, expecting us to glue, and we'd wake up at 6:30 in the evening and sneak out the house and walk into Edinburgh and try and find somebody to buy us a drink, and he'd be gluing away in the dark. It actually got reviewed in and that was just like unbelievable. It just changed everything. It just turned your mind around completely.
By early '79, Bob and Hilary had amassed a roster of eclectic northern talent on Fast, and Bob decided that it was time to shift the label's focus closer to home.
Well, what I always thought was interesting about Fast Product was when it started, it was primarily Northern English groups that were involved in the label. But where it really became charged for me was when they signed the Scars.
Late summer 1977, we did our first gig in Blerno, and it was like a whole year passed. And meanwhile, the Mekons came out, the Gang of Four, the Human League, and I was like, are we never going to get our chance to make a record?
I can very clearly remember seeing Roxy Music on the Old Grey Whistle test. But, you know, that moment was why, when I first saw the Scars actually play, that was my reference point where I get this.
I mean, a lot of people suggest that Blue Boy by Orange Juice was the start of the whole explosion, you know, and that Blue Boy was like Scotland's Anarchy in the UK. I don't think it was. I think it was Adultery and Horror Show on Fast Product by the Scars.
He took us to Rochdale of all places, to record our first single, and it happened really quickly. It was quite raw.
Horror Show was essentially just a synopsis of the folklore horror. It was called possibly the most violent song ever written, just because of the nature of the lyrics.
That exploded. That was just incredible, and it still sounds incredible. You know what? It's just an amazing kind of mission statement. And the fact that Fast Product had signed, you know, a band from Edinburgh, it just felt that Scotland was alive.
New labels, clubs and fanzines were in proliferation.
There's bands springing up everywhere, fanzines on the grassroots level, people putting out their own independent records and stuff like that.
In what seemed a completely mad move, I decided to set up a small live event on a Tuesday night. Why Tuesday night, I don't know, but a place called the Aquarius in Grindlay Street. It immediately became apparent there was a whole other culture and group of acts that were doing really exciting things.
Alan started his own label, Rational, which went on to home the Visitors, the Delmonts and Article 58.
We used to support bands like A Certain Ratio, The Scars. It was quite a fertile time. Everyone was involved in trying to do things.
Well, there was a bit of band rivalry, obviously, but we were all very supportive of each other. We'd borrow equipment from each other, share PAs, put on gigs together so that we could get gigs.
Because folk would just do it because they were into it and because they enjoyed it. I mean, now everyone wants paid for everything, and then it was just for the fun of it then.
Stephen Daly, drummer with Glasgow band The New Sonics, was one such enthusiast. He had his own label, Absolute, and wanted to sign an austere, uncompromising Edinburgh outfit. He loved the sound, if only they'd changed their name.
They should have kept their name as TV Art, man. They would have been big now, but they changed it to Joseph K. I mean, that sounds like something out of a book, right?
Okay, this is Joseph K, and it's called Chant Meeting.
For me anyway, in Edinburgh at that time, there were 3 bands that I saw live. They were absolutely sensational. The Associates, the Fire Engines and Joseph K.
All of the members of Joseph K, we all went to the same high school.
I knew of Malcolm and David. They weren't sort of in my gang, as it were. They're far too intellectual.
The red sky behind you. The feeling you've been here before.
A lot of people look back and say, how did they sound like that? What was it all about? We wanted to try and get people to dance, and in Edinburgh that was a difficult job. I mean, I was heavily into James Brown and stuff, and to make the marriage of the abrasive, slightly punk new wave guitars with a sort of straight beat was something definitely trying to do.
A lot of the stuff about punk and music in 77, 78 was everyone was using fuzz boxes. So it was taking that clean, trebly guitar sound and trying to really take it to an extreme.
Just felt right, but calmer than punk.
The first time I saw Joseph K played with an incredible intensity, and I remember thinking at that point, this feels exciting and it feels like somebody should be doing something about these guys.
Alan became their manager and the gigs started rolling in.
They were so great and we were jealous. These guys that could play anything. We exchanged unpleasantries, and I think there might have been some fists, very small ones, teenage fists. But then we became great friends after that, just through a shared interest in Lucky Strike cigarettes.
By 1979, Fast Product's unconventional approach marked them out from the burgeoning indie market, and the label became as much of a story as the bands.
We really were inundated after the first 3 or 4 singles. And this is where the idea of the earcoms came on. It was earcomming.
The idea of being like a music magazine where you got a taster.
And it was to give a snapshot of very, very, very different things that were happening.
Keir Street alumni The Thursdays were featured, fronted by cult poet Paul Reiki.
Jen has remarkable properties. If you want to get flat drunk, it'll make you that way. It'll make you a crisp, fluorescent the next day.
Paul used to start the set with a Nico poem, Frozen Warnings. And then we joined them on stage. And we were ducking bottles because we weren't thrashing out.
No, I don't know just why.
For the second issue, Bob and Hilary released a couple of tracks by a Manchester band that'd been on the brink of signing.
Joe Callis and I in particular were huge fans of Warsaw, the precursor of Joy Division. And we would give them support slots whenever we could. And we had on and off discussions about releasing them.
We had turned down the original Joy Division because I knew what the name meant, and I was uncomfortable.
Joy Division is a reference to the corps of prostitutes that the Nazis created for their military. And I think they were playing with iconography the same way we did, and they were being provocative.
I since met them. When Ian Curtis came off, he was a lovely guy, like cats, came to visit us. It was all fine, but, you know, I had reservations.
We played a few days with the Rosillos. Bob Last was the manager at the time. We'd always sort of kept in touch. He mentioned his idea for ACOM, and we just offered him, you know, the 2 tracks.
They gave me the tracks because I asked them. You know, you don't get something if you don't ask for it.
From Safety to Where was written in the studio, and Bernard didn't like it, I remember, and put very, very reluctant guitar on it. It just goes. It's like the least you could possibly do on a track, but it worked.
No, I don't know which way.
Joy Division instead signed to Tony Wilson's fledgling indie label, Factory.
Tony Wilson, when he started setting up Factory, he called me up many times to ask about, well, how do you do this? And there are some things about what he did which come from a similar place to what we were doing.
They turned out to be great friends, and they did actually inspire each other. People like Tony Wilson, people like Bob Last are very, very few and far between in this business. They aren't out for themselves. It's all about the music.
Fast 13, that was Factory. That's my view. I just never told them that they had a catalogue number, until now.
Indie labels now ruled the airwaves, in the evenings at least.
Well, it was late 70s as it hit 1980. It was an incredibly transformative moment in music because it was that stage beyond punk, which was obviously given the name, possibly by me, post-punk. It certainly splattered the idea that music could come from anywhere around the country. So suddenly you started to pay attention to other places, you know, Liverpool, Manchester, Yorkshire, Scotland, you know.
The tinderbox of punk had been slower to ignite over on the West Coast.
Punk was banned in Glasgow though, wasn't it? Because I thought Glasgow Council said they weren't allowed to play any punk gigs, anyone.
One of the earliest so-called punk gigs was a gig at the City Halls in Glasgow. The Stranglers headlined it, and at the end of the gig, fans invaded the stage and the gig got abandoned, you know, because in the City Halls, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's no proper security men. It's kind of elderly stewards who wear kind of maroon blazers with the City Hall, you know, crest embroidered in the on the pocket of the jacket. So they just couldn't cope. And then the Evening Times did a story saying there'd been a mini riot.
I couldn't possibly have people spitting and all that kind of thing, as if that was all that it was about.
But local bands emerged, spearheaded by Glasgow punk legend Jimmy Loser, guitarist of the Fun Four.
I used to go to the record store 6 days a week. I'd go in there about 11 o'clock and stay there till it was at 5 to get shut, to get thrown out. And that's how you got to actually form bands. First time I met Alan Horn, he used to hang about Bruce's record store, not speaking to anyone. Stand at the side until they actually did tell Alan, would you mind actually leaving the shop?
This is Postcard Records. And we have here, this is Orange Juice fan mail. And this is the accounts, and they're not really sorted out either, and the tax man will get us for this.
Alan Horn and his friend Edwin Collins were setting up a West Coast indie label to rival Fast Product, planning to launch Edwin's band Orange Juice onto the world.
found Orange Juice, Blue Boy, sitting on the record player. So I put the needle on it, and then it was an epiphany moment. You think, what is this? And from that moment on, you just think that's the best thing I've ever heard.
Their idea was that this was a big, shiny pop record label, and they were going to have pop hits.
First time I heard anything about Postcard was a guy stopped me in the street and said, there's this great thing happening in a house in Charing Cross, you know, and they started a record label, and I was like, you know, what are you talking about? And it was, of course, 185 West Princess Street, the famous flat inhabited by the now legendary Alan Horn.
Don't really know what to say about Alan. It isn't too controversial.
If you speak to anyone from Orange Juice, they go straight for the jugular with Alan.
He was a lovely guy.
Cheeky, egocentric, naughty.
Very intelligent, fierce energy. Somebody to make things happen.
He was very witty.
So cutting and camp and cynical.
There's a sort of bullying element as well, which I guess you have to be that persuasive.
I found him very condescending and dismissive of musicians.
He famously thought that the managers in punk rock were as important as the singers. You know, Malcolm McLaren would be interviewed as well as the Sex Pistols, almost like artists in themselves, and I think that's what he modelled himself as.
Suddenly you had this kind of pop Svengali, or as near to a pop Svengali as Scotland was ever going to get.
Like Fast, Postcard would also last for only 2 years and produce a dozen records, but would inspire C86, Creation, and a new generation of indie talent. And their first single went straight into the charts, the indie charts.
I think with Falling and Laughing, that was fantastic. You couldn't want for more. Single of the week, and our first single sold out 1,000 copies in no time.
As soon as you heard Orange Juice, it had a sound, because Alan Horn was very much that, and it's true, a label must have a sound.
And that sound quickly became known as the sound of young Scotland.
The thing that was great about Orange Juice was that they were a punk rock band, but they sort of said, well, okay, we're a punk rock band, but we really want to make records like Chic.
Punk was kind of resolutely, you know, working class, and there was a lot of people and, you know, kind of embraced the whole ripped jeans kind of aspect of it. So when Edwin and Alan appeared on the scene, they looked like something from the Famous Five.
Postcard can be seen as being a very parochial kind of organisation. I don't agree that it was. It was a humorous way of slapping London people in the face.
I loved the character, the personality, the fact that it was nothing like anything else. It came out of its own world. Everything about it could have only been Postcard. You very quickly begin to trust it, which is an amazing thing for a label to do, you know, out of nowhere. I want all those records. They're all going to be great. I trust it.
The sounds of young Scotland were radically different coast to coast. The East had borne the brunt of the punk outbreak in '77, and that was mirrored in the music.
It was almost like America. It was East Coast and West Coast, and Edinburgh was very definitely the East Coast. You were getting the sounds of Perubu, you were getting the sounds of television, that abrasive, angular thing.
Yeah, I don't know what they were into in Glasgow, but they were definitely much more sort of melodic and nice and sort of middle class.
But there was one musical influence both sides were agreed on.
It started with the Velvets, I think.
It was the Velvets.
The Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground.
Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground.
Velvet Underground.
Velvet Underground.
The Velvet Underground.
You know, I think the Velvet Underground are the most important band to every Scottish band that came out from 1976 until probably 1986.
I remember seeing Velvet's albums in Coburn Street Market, and I remember seeing copies of White Light, White Heat, and looking at the cover, and it was black. It looked incredibly exotic, and I was too scared to buy it, actually.
I mean, when I first met Edwin, I think he was carrying the first Subway Sex single and Velvet Underground album. They were kind of like his blueprint. you know, for a group.
There's so many pathways that lead to the heart.
It was the cusp of a new decade, and one band was preparing to cross the east-west divide. Tempted by the poppy sounds of Postcard, Joseph K defected.
Alan Horn, asked us to be on Postcard Records. We didn't want Postcard Records just to be a vehicle for orange juice.
I think he had an idea that he'd like Postcard to be a kind of Motown as well, though. He wanted real classic pop tunes and big classic productions, so we were certainly an antidote to sort of the glossier side of things.
Alan boldly combined the darkness and light of his two signings with a joint release of singles, which shot to number 15 in the indie charts. And Joseph K got to experience the great Postcard publicity machine at first hand.
Those shared sleeves, so you had like 4 7-inch squares, and then they were hand-coloured.
I think there was only about 5 of us in this room with felt pens and and 1,000 of these things. We're going, we'll get this done in no time.
Alan liked to think it was kind of like a wee factory records scene. There was one transvestite that used to go and hang about there, and he loved that, Lucy Alexander. So anyone who went up to Alan's, he would just give them a felt pen and a pile of these and say, can you colour in a few of these for me?
We ended up getting like a whole load of felt pens and just doing this across them because it had taken so long, and we were started off going, just colouring them really nice.
We liked being on Postcard Records. We liked to be independent. No desire to sign to a major label.
Alan Horn and Bob Last, although not necessarily soulmates, shared the same philosophy, that you shouldn't have to go to London to make it in the pop business.
What we now know as indie music was invented in Scotland. If you think about Postcard, Fast Product, that's the seeds of labels like Creation. That's really been the template for indie music to this day.
I was always very proud of doing things from Scotland that were UK-wide and international. And that, to me, was the point of being in Scotland. It wasn't to be narrowly Scottish. It was to say, hey, Scotland's part of, we stand up there with everybody else.
There's no reason why we shouldn't operate from Glasgow. There's no reason why, if we wanted a major contract, the major record company shouldn't come out up here and bring the coals to Newcastle and the fish from the fire.
It's interesting, Postcard were reactive to Fast Product. More than they knew, they were reactive to that. They were going, well, what can we do that's not them? And so right from a get-go, part of what energised Postcard was not being Fast Product.
I think both Bob Last and Alan viewed each other very, very warily and circled each other and avoided contact.
Somebody told me in the recent book about Postcard I evidently sent them death threats. I don't remember it being that tribal. So it was quite adversarial, but it was interesting to see that this energy was spreading out.
But for one band of post-punk pioneers, London was calling.
I think it's great. Pavements are golden, and, everything's wonderful.
Nothing lasts forever. Okay, everything has a lifespan, and our creative relationship with Fast had a lifespan as well, and when it was over, we knew it. We knew we wanted to move on to something more commercial, and we parted with mutual respect.
Now from Edinburgh comes Scars, who've just released their first album, Author.
Was a cold day outside today. I have nothing to do, so I thought about.
They got pretty big, I think. They were on the TV, man.
Paul Morley got interested in the band. I said to him, have you seen the review? It sounds fantastic. He said, that's nothing, wait until you see my review. And I just thought, oh my God, this is great.
Suddenly we were propelled into that arena. Getting stopped on Oxford Street or in Soho by girls and giggling, send you fan mail and stuff like this. So in that sense, it was good fun.
They signed to a major and made a critically acclaimed album, but it would prove to be their only one. Bigger budgets and less control.
I always thought it was a shame for the Scars because they've fantastic album, but then, you know, somebody's taking photographs of them dressed up as New Romantics. It's just really unfortunate, you know, it was just like, whoa.
Being on an indie label is different from being on a major label, and the expectations are different. The budgets are bigger, so you've got to sell more records, there's more pressure to have a hit. It's the same old story.
You know, we consider it pretentiously as our art, they call it product, you know.
We were playing some really good gigs and we just couldn't get that sound to translate in the studio. We didn't have the right sympathetic kind of ears that we had had when we recorded to Horror Show and Adultery.
I think being in a band is like, I liken it to being married. All the good and the bad compressed, you know. You're touring with guys, you know, everything about them. What you want to know and what you don't want to know. And, you know, that's quite a pressure cooker for young guys.
Robert left the band and we carried on, tried to find another singer, it didn't work out.
The same things that made it work ultimately tore it apart, if you get my drift.
Following the Scars' departure, Bob decided that Fast had outlived its purpose. He put out 2 more singles by the Dead Kennedys and Human League and shut the label down.
If you look at what went on in Fast Product, if you think of it as one body of work that collectively every band, everybody who ever walked in the flat, collectively made together, anyone who beat me up because I didn't release a single, all those people were part of it. Somehow or other I knew it had finished. It's too far gone to remember exactly how I knew, but it was done. And we wanted to go on doing things and trying out new ideas, so rather than muddy the waters of what Fast Product had done, invented a new brand. I mean, that all sounds like rather grand rationalisation. It might be we were just bored.
And so Pop Aural was born.
I think he saw in mind some kind of label where, you know, all the acts had a certain affinity, a youngness, a popness, if you like, you know, aiming at the charts.
Well, we always thought this was about pop music. Let's see if we can make some pop music. Turned out, A, we couldn't, and B, we'd been so corrupted by what we did by Fast Product that we thought that Davey Henderson was a pop star.
Alan always wanted to sign the Fire Engines, and I think was absolutely galled that Bob Last signed them to Pop Aural.
The plan is my survival, alongside a big song of the people love.
The plan is my survival, alongside a big song of the bulldozer. I never sang that for a while, I can assure you.
True Fast tradition, the packaging played fast and loose with the concepts of consumerism.
They said, right, we want to be commodified. We're going to be half naked, oiled up with slabs of meat and boxes of soap powder.
Let's go to the abattoir, take our clothes off and like hang out and get covered in baby oil. Sadly, we couldn't get into the abattoir and we settled on buying about 15 quid's worth of steaks from the Safeways.
And I did this photo session. It was very funny. It was in my flat, and I had had a break-in a week before. I had all these half-naked, oiled-up boys on my sitting room floor, and the doorbell goes, and it was the police about my break-in.
Bob's roster of potential pop stars included mini supergroup Boots for Dancing.
Slightly punky funk kind of thing. The Enemy were interested in doing a cover feature on us, you know, and Dave bottled out. Dave decided it wasn't for him. He was worried his mates wouldn't talk to him or something, or think he'd sold out or something like that. It was just like, duh. What were you thinking of, Dave?
I mean, I was just a teenager then, but I didn't play the game. But I'm quite proud I didn't play the game, because that's pretty punk as far as I'm concerned.
Of course, we did Candy Skin.
It was Bob that put the strings on Candy Skin, which probably is the best thing about it for me.
We were always interested in looking for sort of cracks into the mainstream. It was probably the closest we ever got throughout any of that time to something that actually was recognizable to other people as being pop.
Candy Skin is very catchy, and it did get on to Round Table, you know, the BBC thing.
Where it was roundly dismissed as the worst produced record that anyone had ever heard.
And at the end he says, no, I don't think it's good because it sounds out of tune at the end. And it's going, that's our sound. It's like, it's not out of tune, that's how it's meant to sound. So it got the thumbs down.
I think it was a great bit of outsider pop, and remains a great bit of outsider pop.
Despite critical success, Bob again decided enough was enough and disbanded the label. But not to leave the music business. On the contrary, he had his sights set on greater things: band management and publishing.
I had no ambition to have my own major label. I was interested in that action of being the insurgent, and I'd done it.
Bobby invited me to go for something to eat in the Habitat at the West End. That was kind of New Year's Eve, actually, I think. He told me he was starting a publishing company, and he wanted me to be one of the acts. It was either me or not at all, on my own. And I went home and split the band up.
Russell phoned me in on, I think it was New Year's Day in 1982, was it? Possibly 83, I think it was 82. See, I don't even know when we finished, it's that long ago. And said, that's it, it's finished, Davy's left the band, we're over, and that was that.
It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, of which there are a few. The people in the fire engines and the Dirty Reds are my brothers. And I suppose I feel like I let them down.
I got myself a situation down the young man's Christian.
Postcard, meanwhile, had been expanding his sock drawer. Alan signed the magnificent guitar-based Australian two-piece The Go-Betweens, and when he enlisted East Kilbride's Aztec Camera fronted by boy wonder Roddy Frame, it cemented the label's reputation as a force to be reckoned with.
We got a big three-page spread in Sounds, I believe, before we released the record. The hip press, so-called hip press, well, they thought, well, they had like Edwin and then Roddy. There must be loads of this stuff up here.
It was really exciting because we'd never had any of that. We'd never experienced the music press being interested in. There came a time in the early 80s where it seemed that anybody who walked in Sucky Hall Street carrying a guitar case, you know, an A&R man would jump out with a checkbook and say, sign here, I'll give you a deal.
There was a big kind of, almost like a novelty, like for the London music journalists, to getting on the train, you know, and actually going 5 hours and finding this whole scene, you know.
It was just the place to be, you know, you didn't have to go to London anymore. It was equally, if not even more exciting, because it was ours. You know, we had it, and it was a 10-minute cab ride for the house.
With the press eagerly awaiting more pop pearls from Postcard, Alan felt it was time to put out the label's first album. It wasn't by Orange Juice, but by enemy favourites Joseph K.
Well, I thought Paul Haig was a pop star. He looked like a pop star. I liked the enigma, the cryptic quality, the beauty of the voice. That was my kind of pop star, you know, slightly thought, you know, existential, you know. Looked like he read Beckett but loved Diana Ross, you know. It just seemed the perfect hybrid.
But the classic pop charm of a 45 didn't translate to 33 RPM.
When we heard the masters, it sounded blanded out. Pure and simple, it just didn't seem to be the sound of Joseph K.
So Alan started sowing seeds of doubt about. He was saying, I don't think it sounds very good, the drums are mixed too loud, we're not happy with this, we don't have to put this out, I'll talk to Rough Trade. Of course, Rough Trade were aghast because they'd put up, quite a substantial budget for it. In relative terms, I think we'd been in the studio for 5 days or something, So we didn't put it out, and we went back to the studio in Belgium and recorded the scratchy, difficult to listen to Only Fun in Town album.
It took 10 years to realise why the angels start to cry.
I got completely slated when it came out.
I think my feeling about that first Joseph K album was what happened. Everything was happening so quick, and I think it was just a level of disappointment. I had in my head this kind of weird vision of Paul Haig being on top of the Pops 3 or 4 times a year. How sexy would that be, And then suddenly I heard the album, and I just had one of those bad-tempered moments of like, oh, you fucking fucked it up.
I remember Paul Morley talking to me about it, saying how disappointed he'd been, how things should have moved on, and he'd thought we should have sounded like the Police.
It was almost like, to him, a betrayal, I think. We'd purposely committed commercial suicide or something.
But I think it was very much out of love and affection. Oh, I'm so disappointed you've let me down, forgetting, that, oddly enough, the ramification of that it was because I was obviously meant to be the postcard guy, and suddenly the postcard guy had scrawled all over the postcard, saying it's bloody rubbish, what's happening?
Not releasing that first Joseph K album, for building the label and for any kind of commerciality, that was just a ridiculous decision to make. It was art, not commerce.
But commerce was the name of the 80s game.
They're probably the most successful British group to combine German-style electronics with a fairly commercial form of melody. The Human League play us out.
Bob Last was now managing the Human League, grooming them for pop stardom. But his strategy for chart success would have massive implications for the band.
Bob was a very appealing character to us because he had this kind of aura around him that he was like your dad. We just liked the way that he approached the business. But behind the scenes, I didn't realise Bob was manipulating and was in deep discussion with the record company about how to split us and take Phil away and make him into a pop star, make loads of money, and get 2 bands for the price of 1, essentially.
The divide and conquer game plan worked well. The Schism produced 2 bands, Human League Mark II and Heaven 17, with Bob managing both.
Martin Wares, he was kind of sacked from his own band. The band that he formed, he was sacked from.
Because I was in a state of shock. You can imagine, this was the first example of, well, probably only example in my entire life, thinking about it, of proper betrayal. I mean, full-on epic betrayal,
Bob then brought in Joe Callis with his poppy sensibility to navigate the new improved Human League towards the charts.
There was all this eclectic interest, and one extreme of it was ABBA. Phil, a great admirer of ABBA, and everything very produced and very commercial, very pop. So I think Bob probably picked up on that and thought, well, let's just have an arty ABBA.
Human League didn't actually know anything about music, and I didn't want someone in there who was going to turn them into some sort of progressive musical noodling, which was clearly a risk factor. And so I thought the idea of Joe bringing his very taut song-making and noise attitude to them might be a good idea. It turned out to be a very good idea. It felt entirely right.
A duo from the East Coast were also on the brink of cracking the mainstream. Rooted in disco and Bowie, they were an antidote to the proliferous indie guitar bands.
Did we use helium? No, not on recording. But we did have helium in the studio because we just thought it was so freaking funny.
It was like kind of anti-rock in a way. Fantastical pop music that was like, some of it came from Bowie, some of it came from disco.
I was already in this band, and this band I was in, they liked Genesis and Yes, and all things prog. But you can tell by the name, Caspian, for fuck's sake. But I heard this voice, and it was in Tiffany's in Edinburgh, and I said, I've got to have that voice.
Don't make me do what the atheists do.
You know, we wrote Party Fears 2 in 1977. At that time, my parents stayed in Linlithgow, and we'd go out and get hammered on Saturday night, and then wake up on Sunday morning and go down to the piano in the front room. And that's the piano that Party Fears 2 was written on. I came up with the riff, and we looked at each other and said, "That's a hit, isn't it?" He said, "Yeah, but not now." Because at that time it just sounded, it was too poppy. It wasn't a 3-chord trick played at breakneck speed.
Party Fears 2 got to number 9 in the charts and was the first in a string of hits. Now based in London, the band moved from major to major, taking a reputation for excess with them.
Little Francesco, the barman, I once asked him, I said, who's the most rock and roll person you've ever had in this bar? Without a doubt, Alan Rankin from the Associates. He said he was the most mental of everyone. I know that him and Billy always took things to an extreme, and that was the part of the Associates that made me like them at the time as well, because they managed to take it to an extreme. They weren't built just to be conventional pop stars.
I've never worked with a singer as good as Bill, but he didn't want this massive world tour thing and all this pressure to be brought to bear on him and everyone else around him.
With Billy's unwillingness to tour, their career foundered when they refused a lucrative publishing offer from States record supremo Seymour Stein.
He's big time. I will pay off all the radio stations. I will do the bribes. I will do the girls, the guys, the coke, the dope, whatever. And I will give you guys about 400,000 quid each just because I can. And Bill said, I didn't want to do it. And it was just, I could see Seymour choking on his quail's eggs. So it was just downhill from then. But I'm kind of disappointed that no one's, really freaking grabbed me like Bill.
It was becoming increasingly difficult to compete as an indie in the glitzy world of 80s pop.
It seemed at that time that all the bands that were involved in the independent scene were suddenly discovering sequins and pop. I mean, it was the big gold dream.
Everybody's somebody's fool.
Cracking the charts was the big gold dream. And Alan Horn was convinced he could do this from the Warhol-esque factory he'd created. He nurtured a bunch of young bands like Strawberry Switchblade and the Pastels, signed the Jazzeteers, and had hopes of releasing a Bluebells track.
Alan was a big fan of one of our songs, Everybody's Somebody's Fool, and he wanted that to be a single. And I remember Alan kind of interviewing us, to see what we were all about when we were in the Bluebells early on. And one of the questions was, which part of Easterhouse are you Neds from?
How can I put it? Alan wasn't a great manager. He had lots of really good ideas. He could actually make stuff happen with radio stations and press, which was great. He could do that side. But as far as the actual creative process was going on, he was actually fairly unencouraging. and quite dismissive.
I don't know if Alan knew what to do with us. We had a lot of good press, and when we released Just Like Gold, it delivered, and everyone thought, this is wonderful, you know, the next big thing, blah, blah, blah. If it had gone at that point, we maybe have got whoever we wanted, but we held back, rather Roddy held back. And end up, the biggest label that was doing with us was Rough Trade.
Unfortunately, this coincided with Alan having a kind of loss of confidence about where the label was going and what was happening with the label. Because the plan for Postcard Records was to release an Orange Juice album and an Aztec Camera album. And if he'd done that, if he'd just ridden it out for a couple of years, you know, Postcard Records could have gone on to be one of the successful, most successful independent labels.
But instead, Postcard began to implode. Frustrated with lack of direction and commercial success, both Orange Juice and Aztec Camera took the big gold road south. It was a blow for Alan, but at least he still had Joseph K, who were on the brink of a European tour.
Joseph K were playing our gig. I think I phoned Davey just to see what time they were going to be leaving with the gear in Edinburgh, and Davey said, oh, Paul's saying this is the last gig he's going to do, and Joseph K's not doing any more gigs after this.
I'd always thought it would just be like it was in the early days. We were really us against the world sort of thing. I decided I'd had enough. It was the right time.
And I was kind of a bit annoyed and that he hadn't even spoken to me about it. And I just kind of said to Davey, oh, well, you know, that's the end of the band then, eh? You know. It's kind of funny. I was walking down to go to the sound check, and we bumped into Edwin in the street. So I was saying to him, oh, is the band splitting up? And Edwin immediately said, why don't you join Orange Juice? And I said, well, what about the rest of them? Do you want to check? And he was like that, no, it's okay. I don't need to check with the rest of them, you can join. So that was the 5-piece, and it was no fun at all. Everyone was squabbling all the time, mostly David and Stephen. They were meant to be the rhythm section.
For Alan, the loss of his main stars was the death knell for Postcard. After producing only 11 singles and 1 album, he decided it was time to wind up the label.
Well, I often think, funnily enough, back then, the idea of a 2-year burst of activity was about the length you wanted, really. You know, there was something true to the spirit of pop. You know, the idea of pop music happening, making a statement, and then disintegrating.
I guess the kind of sparkle did go off the Scottish music business because that's when it became cool to be on a major label. So it became almost the norm for a band to get a deal and move to London.
People were not content to be on Rough Trade anymore. They wanted to be on the biggest major, have the biggest budget, and compete in the real charts.
Bob had wholeheartedly embraced the lucrative 80s music business, managing shiny pop giants Heaven 17, ABC, and Scritti Politti, along with the Human League. Now on major label Virgin, he steered them to worldwide success with their new album Dare, which shot to #1 on both sides of the Atlantic, producing 4 hit singles. It was a far cry from the indie days.
You were working as a waitress in a cocktail bar. When I met you, I picked you out.
It was almost like a complete surprise that it went that stratospheric, you know. You know, that's not really the band that you thought you were. You thought you were a bit darker and a bit less pop.
There were arguments about Don't You Want Me as to whether it should be a single. And I very clearly remember hearing the opening bars of it and thinking this has got to be the big hit.
Don't you want me?
Bill Oakey, who is fantastically, could outdo me for being cantankerous and perverse, I think picked up on the fact that I knew that was a big hit and did his damnedest to persuade everyone it wasn't. Which I think in retrospect was just he and I having an arm wrestle about who was the cleverer tactician.
Don't you want me, baby?
Bob's tactics paid off. Don't You Want Me got the coveted Christmas #1 slot and stayed there for 5 weeks. He'd done what he set out to do back in the fast days and conquered the mass market.
In retrospect, my personal view is that we would not have split up had it not been manipulated, that we would have gone on to be more successful. I just think it was a slower burner. However, you can't argue with the fact that Dare sold 9 million records or whatever it was. M17 went on to sell millions and millions of records. I can't blame him, you know, I can't dislike him even. I just really think he's a great lad, you know.
Right, Billy, what we've got here is an analogy for pop music in the 80s, okay? We have this beautiful food, looks good enough to eat, but what is it? Plastic.
Happiness is hard to find, likewise with peace of mind, but anything is possible.
By now, Alan Horn had come to one conclusion: follow the money. In 1984, after 2 years in limbo, he upped sticks and talked London Records into giving him the cash to start his own label, Swamplands.
The story of Swamplands, really, you can trace it from the logo and postcard, which is a little pussycat. On Swamplands, it's become a big cat. And I think Alan inevitably realised that you had to grow up a bit and get muscle and do a deal with the devil, which in this case was London Records, if he was going to get some kind of success.
So he had this kind of blank canvas, and for the first time in his life, he had a bag of money.
He had total carte blanche to do what he wanted. He was this sort of enfant terrible.
He surrounded himself with a roster of familiar faces. James Kirk's new band Memphis, James King and the Lone Wolves, and Torch singer Paul Quinn. And he finally achieved his dream of signing Fire Engines and their new incarnation as a three-piece Win with multi-instrumentalist Ian Stoddart.
We'll work out some chords and whatever. And we're doing the thing, they'd be going, Stoddy, man, you're the fucking musician, man. You can fucking do it, man. You're the musician. You're the fucking...
I think Alan put us on a wage. He said, we want 100 quid a week. That's ridiculous. Orange juice only get 80 quid. That's ridiculous. But he gave us 100 quid a week, and we were pretty happy with that.
The songs were great, and the production was very saccharine, which was a deliberate ruse to try and appeal to mainstream 1980s tastes at the time.
When their ears pricked was we made a song called You've Got the Power. They could not deny in any way whatsoever that this was a pop song that could get into the national charts.
They put us in this big studio in London, and then what they did is they got me to hit each drum and sample each drum. So we'd sample each drum, they would take each drum individual sound and put it to the stuff they'd programmed. I didn't, you know, this is it. You look at back now and you just think, why don't you just let me play the fucking drums?
It's a different, incredibly different world. We just never had any experience on how to execute things in that environment, and so you do leave a lot of decisions up to the producer, and you're grateful that he can get any results at all.
You could just go to the pub or go away, they'd come back, and you didn't really have to do anything because they were just taking a little floppy disk and making it sound horrendous.
It kind of became this quite exaggerated, overblown pop song, really, that London Records could not ignore, but everybody else in the world did. They had a meeting and decided it was my voice that wasn't radio friendly. It was my fault in the end for writing the song in the first place and not being able to sing it.
Unexpectedly, it looked like we were about to hit the big time when the song was picked up by Scottish brewery McEwan's.
McEwan's is the best buy, the best buy, the best buy.
The song shot to nationwide popularity in their ad campaign.
But the thing with that was we had this massive marketing debacle or kind of problem, or just, you know, what they call a marketing fail.
He's doing really well, and Simple Minds came out that same weekend. And we'd sold more records than them, but they went straight in the top 20. It was like, how come we're not even entered the charts? And they said, well, we've weighted this, the sales.
Because the bulk of the sales were from Scotland, they were disallowed and the song failed to chart.
London Records just sort of didn't get back to us one day. That period was over. They'd chucked us.
I don't think London fully understood them. It might have been that once they were in with a big label, they needed a different kind of management. But I suppose if you were going to work with a major label, it required a kind of business strength and resilience that they didn't have.
Alan just disappeared. He just kind of evaporated, as he does.
But the driving force behind the label was Alan's belief that Paul Quinn was a star in the making, and that consumed all his attention.
Well, Paul I've been working with off and on for years, and it's always been like, I've always, you know, thought he could be very successful and make great records.
Is he an erratic person to have to work for?
Yes.
Is that not bad then?
No.
Why?
Because any creative people are erratic. But I think that means that something of some worth will come through.
I think the worst thing that happened to both Alan and Paul was meeting. I think Alan wrecked Paul's career, and I think Paul wrecked Alan's career. Alan seemed to devote too much of his time worrying about what Paul's career was going to be like, so he said, let's look at my record label. It was Paul.
Ain't that always the way? With Paul I can make the records I always wanted to make with Postcard, I suppose. And now we've all learnt a bit along the way and we've got access to things, we've got the money. There should be nothing stopping us now.
Paul recorded 2 singles for Swamplands. Despite Alan's perseverance, chart success eluded them.
Alan always decried on Postcard Records how we didn't have the money or the infrastructure to have hit records, and then he had that with Swamplands and he still didn't have any hit records.
When he was doing it in this kind of ad hoc DIY cottage industry basis, when they never had, you know, 2 pots to piss in, creatively it seemed much stronger, but, you know, try as he might to kind of keep his distance from the big wheels of the London-based record company, he inevitably was sucked in a wee bit.
But his musical instincts were in the right place. Many of the bands he'd nurtured in West Princes Street did go on to have top 10 success, but only after signing to the majors. The big gold dream could only be achieved on a big old budget.
The thing is, I think Alan Horn was a lot cleverer than people give him credit for. An entire city full of artists kind of stepped forward and moved on in different ways. And that's his achievement. The fact that he didn't win big time, well, you know what? A lot of people don't win big time. There's no shame in that. He took them on and pretty much got a result.
In 1985, Alan Horn wound up the label and retired from the music industry. Bob Last, meanwhile, had moved into movies. But in the space of a few short years, they and the bands they'd nurtured had exploded the music scene.
The dawning of Postcard and Fast was the beginning of the real Scottish music scene, and then we ran with it after that as Creation.
It's a great time to be a kid in Scotland, to have two incredible labels on your doorstep was, pretty fucking lucky, I think, Fast and Postcard never lost the punk aesthetic.
I'm still making music because of people like Bob. They were literally changing the world, and they made great records while they were doing it.
It did cause outrage, but it's about being fast, it's about being intense, and we're done. I miss that moment of standing at the side of the stage where a band goes on and plays that opening bar of something that you know people are going to go apeshit about. That's a rush.
Yes, it mattered, but it mattered for a moment. So when you had that moment, make it matter.
How does it feel to be an influence? I'm humbled.
We thought we were making good music, and people today still think it is. And yeah, it's very gratifying.
I'm still very proud to have been part of one of the most exciting times in Scottish music history.
Thank God I heard him that night in Tiffany's, and I'd probably still be playing flipping, God knows, flipping bloody Close to the Edge by bloody Yes.
Somebody wrote Dirty Reds, Edinburgh's only true punks, and that's good enough for me.
When I look back on my life, I think I was lucky to be born when I was. These new friendships that were forged sort of from the age of 17 to, say, 21, 22, they are for life.
I think there's always going to be a sound of young Scotland. I think there is one right now. The sound of any young country should always be changing. And in a way ours still is.
It's always worth pursuing whatever makes you happy. I've got to write the movie, you know what I mean? There's a movie to write. No. But anyway, shall we proceed?
This town, the shell.